The ship broke through the amber clouds of Valanthra Prime, and Commander Jack Holloway felt his heart beating faster than it had in years, though his face showed nothing but calm determination as he stood at the bridge of the Earth vessel Horizon's Edge, watching the alien world reveal itself below them like a nightmare made real. Lieutenant Amy Graves sat at the communications array with her fingers moving across the controls, and she glanced up at Jack with eyes that held fear and courage in equal measure, asking him without words if they were really going to do this. If 12 humans were really going to walk into the capital of a galactic empire that had ruled for millions of years. "Steady," Jack said in a voice that carried through the bridge like a warm blanket on a cold night. "We knew what we were signing up for when we left Earth. The Galactic Conclave had sent their message to humanity only 6 months ago, and the words still burned in Jack's memory like fire that would not die. They had called humanity to their capital world, not as guests and not as friends, but as a young species that needed to learn its place in the order of the universe. Navigator Sam Ortega pulled up the landing coordinates on his screen and whistled low under his breath when he saw the city stretching across the continent below them, a maze of towers and spires that reached up toward the stars like the fingers of giants trying to touch heaven itself. "That city is bigger than any country on Earth," Sam said with wonder in his voice. "How many people live down there?" "Millions of different species," Amy answered as she read the data streaming across her console. "The Conclave has been collecting civilizations for longer than humanity has existed, and they all live here in the capital, serving the elder races that rule everything. Engineer." Katie Walsh emerged from the engine room with grease on her hands and determination on her face, and she looked out the main viewport at the alien world below with the same expression she wore when facing a broken reactor that needed fixing no matter the cost. "Engines are running smooth," she reported to Jack. "Whatever happens down there, we can leave in a hurry if we need to." Jack nodded, but they both knew the truth. If the Conclave wanted to stop them from leaving, no amount of engine power would save them, because the elder races commanded fleets that could crack planets like eggs and weapons that could tear holes in the fabric of space itself. Security Chief Derek Coleman stood near the airlock with his team of 4 soldiers, all of them armed with weapons that seemed like toys compared to what awaited them below. But none of them showed fear because Derek had trained them to face the impossible and keep walking forward. Medical Officer Lisa Brennan finished her final checks on the emergency supplies and joined the others at the main viewport, a gentle face hiding a core of steel that had seen her through wars and plagues and disasters that would have broken lesser souls. "The Conclave expects us to break," Lisa said quietly to the group. "Every young species that comes here falls apart when they see the power of the elder races, and then they submit and become servants forever. Then they have never met humans." Derek replied with a grim smile that did not reach his eyes. The ship descended through layers of atmosphere that shifted from amber to purple to a strange silver color that made everything look like a dream. And Jack watched the alien city grow larger and larger until individual buildings became visible, each one a monument to power that humanity could barely imagine. Communications Officer Tony Reeves intercepted a signal from the surface and played it through the speakers, and an alien voice filled the bridge with sounds that the translation software struggled to convert into words that human minds could understand. "Earth vessel, you are cleared for landing at Platform 7 in the arrival district," the voice said in tones that dripped with contempt and boredom. "You will be escorted to the Grand Chamber where the Conclave awaits your submission." Jack pressed the response button and spoke clearly into the microphone. "Horizon's Edge acknowledges landing clearance, and we thank the Conclave for their invitation." He did not say anything about submission, and Amy caught his eye with a small nod of approval that warmed his heart more than he wanted to admit. The ship touched down on a landing platform made of some dark metal that absorbed light like a hungry void, and through the viewport they could See their welcoming committee. A group of Velantran soldiers standing in perfect formation. Their insectoid bodies covered in ceremonial armor that gleamed with colors human eyes had never seen before. Remember the briefing, Jack said as he gathered his crew near the airlock. The Conclave has done this thousands of times, and they have turned breaking new species into an art form. So everything we see out there is designed to make us feel small and weak and afraid. Katie Walsh squared her shoulders and lifted her chin. My grandmother survived the Dust Bowl and the Depression and raised 7 kids on a farm with no running water. And she never bent her knee to anyone. My grandfather landed on a beach in Normandy and walked through fire to free people he had never met. Derek added with pride in his voice. My mother worked 3 jobs to put me through medical school. Lisa said softly, and she never once complained. Sam Ortega smiled at his crewmates with tears in his eyes that he refused to let fall. We come from people who crossed oceans in wooden ships and deserts on foot and space in tin cans, held together with hope and prayer. We are humanity. Amy Graves finished the thought with strength ringing in every word. And we do not break. Jack Holloway looked at his crew and felt something swell in his chest that was bigger than fear and stronger than doubt. And he knew in that moment that whatever happened next, these 12 people would make Earth proud. Open the airlock, he commanded. The door slid open with a hiss of pressure equalizing, and alien air rushed into the ship carrying scents of metal and ozone and something ancient beyond measure. And for a moment no one moved as they stared out at the impossible city that stretched to every horizon. Then Jack Holloway stepped forward onto alien soil, and his crew followed without hesitation. 12 humans walking into the heart of a galactic empire that had crushed countless civilizations beneath its heel. The Velantran soldiers watched them approach with compound eyes that showed no emotion. But something in their posture shifted slightly when they saw that the humans were not trembling or crying or falling to their knees. Follow us, the lead soldier commanded in clicking sounds that the translators rendered into flat human words. Jack walked beside the alien with his head held high and his steps steady and sure. And behind him his crew marched in formation like they were walking through a park on a Sunday afternoon instead of into the jaws of the most powerful empire the galaxy had ever known. The buildings rose around them like mountains, made by hands instead of nature. And everywhere they looked, there were aliens of every shape and size going about their business, most of them stopping to stare at the small group of soft-skinned creatures who dared to walk with such confidence through streets where empires had come to die. They are watching us, Tony Reeves observed in a low voice. Let them watch, Jack replied without breaking stride. Let them see what humanity looks like when we refuse to be afraid. And so they walked deeper into the capital of the Conclave. 12 ordinary humans, carrying the hopes of 8 billion people on their shoulders, heading toward a confrontation that would change the galaxy forever. The Velantran escorts led them through streets that seemed to go on forever, and Jack Holloway noticed how the path twisted and turned in ways designed to confuse and disorient, making the humans feel lost in a maze with no exit and no hope of finding their way back to the ship. They are taking us the long way, Sam Ortega whispered as his navigator instincts picked up on the unnecessary detours and double-back routes. They want us to feel trapped, I noticed, Jack replied quietly. Just keep your eyes forward and your back straight. The first true test came when they entered a massive hall that their escorts called the Gallery of Extinction, and Jack felt his stomach tighten when he saw what awaited them inside. Holographic displays filled the enormous space, each one showing a different civilization that had defied the Conclave and paid the ultimate price. Worlds burning in nuclear fire scrolled past their eyes as they walked, and Amy Graves counted at least 50 different species, whose entire histories were reduced to images of destruction and death. Their cities crumbling to dust, and their people screaming in silent agony. The Crethani refused our guidance. A cold voice spoke from hidden speakers that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Their world was cleansed in 3 standard cycles. The hologram showed a beautiful blue planet similar to Earth, being bombarded from orbit until its oceans boiled away and its atmosphere burned, leaving nothing but a dead rock spinning in the void of space. The more she believed they could resist our authority, the voice continued with cruel satisfaction. We erased them from existence so completely that even the memory of their name would have been lost if we did not preserve it here as a warning. Katie Walsh studied the displays with the critical eye of an engineer and noticed something that made her lips curl into a small smile. The structural engineering on those orbital bombardment platforms is actually quite impressive, she said in a conversational tone that made the Volantran escorts turn their heads in confusion. You admire our weapons of destruction? The lead escort asked with clicking sounds of surprise. I admire good engineering wherever I find it, Katie replied with a shrug. Does not mean I approve of how it was used. The humans continued walking through the hall without slowing their pace or lowering their eyes. And Jack could feel the frustration building in their escorts, who had expected tears and begging. By now, they emerged from the gallery of extinction into something even more terrifying. A vast chamber that stretched upwards so far that clouds formed near the ceiling. And suspended throughout the space were the preserved bodies of creatures so massive that the human mind struggled to comprehend their scale. Welcome to the Chamber of Scale, the lead escort announced, with what sounded like pride in its clicking voice. Here we display the greatest threats the Conclave has ever faced. All of them now dead. All of them reduced to trophies for our glory. Derek Coleman looked up at a creature the size of a small moon hanging above them. Its tentacles frozen in death, but still somehow conveying menace even after countless millennia. And he felt a chill run down his spine that he refused to show on his face. This was a void leviathan, the escort explained while pointing at the enormous corpse. It destroyed entire star systems before we brought it down. And now it hangs here to remind all who see it that nothing is beyond the power of the Conclave. Lisa Brennan walked beneath the monster with her medical training, allowing her to observe the anatomy with professional interest. How did it survive in the vacuum of space? She asked with genuine curiosity. The biological adaptations required would be fascinating to study. The escort seemed thrown off balance by the question. You wish to study our trophy? I am a doctor, Lisa replied simply. Understanding life in all its forms is what I do. Sam Ortega spotted another display showing a hive mind that had once controlled billions of individual bodies, spread across dozens of star systems. All of them connected by some kind of psychic link that the Conclave had severed with brutal efficiency. You know? Derek Coleman said in a voice loud enough for all the escorts to hear. We have whales back home on Earth, the biggest animals that have ever lived on our world. And they sing to each other across entire oceans using songs that their grandmothers taught them. The lead escort clicked its mandibles in confusion. Why do you speak of singing creatures when you stand before the corpse of a god-killer? Because we almost hunted them to extinction once, Derek continued with a faraway look in his eyes. We killed them for oil and meat and sport until there were almost none left, and then we stopped. You stopped? Why would you stop when you had the power to destroy them completely? Because we chose mercy, Derek said while meeting the alien's compound eyes with his own soft human gaze. Because we decided that some things are worth saving even when we have the power to destroy them. The escort fell silent and the humans kept walking, their footsteps echoing through the vast chamber like the heartbeat of a species that refused to be intimidated by displays of death and power. They passed through more chambers designed to crush the spirit. A room where gravity shifted constantly to remind visitors of their physical weakness. A corridor lined with time distortion fields that made some humans age years, while others remained unchanged for just moments. and a gallery showing the mathematical proofs of humanity's cosmic insignificance. Through all of it, Jack Holloway led his crew with steady steps and calm eyes. And each time the conclave tried to break them, they simply observed and commented and continued forward, like tourists visiting a particularly dramatic museum. Amy Graves paused before a display showing Earth's position in the galaxy, a tiny dot in a vast spiral of 400 billion stars, and the accompanying information detailed exactly how unimportant humanity was in the grand scheme of cosmic history. Beautiful, is it not? She said to Katie Walsh, who stood beside her. Katie looked at the display and smiled. It really is. You find your own insignificance beautiful? Another escort asked with disbelief clear in its translated voice. We have always known we were small, Amy replied with warmth in her voice. We looked up at the night sky before we had fire or language, and we understood that the universe was vast beyond measure. But we never let that stop us from reaching for the stars. The escorts exchanged glances that needed no translation, and Jack could see that they were beginning to realize these humans were not like the other species that had walked this path before them. They reached the final corridor before the grand chamber, and here the conclave had saved their most powerful weapon, a living display of species that had submitted to the conclave and now existed in perfect contentment as servants of the elder race's aliens. Of every description went about menial tasks with blank smiles on their faces, their eyes empty of ambition or hope or any spark of individual will. And they moved like puppets on strings, controlled by masters. They no longer had the capacity to question. This is your future, the lead escort said with certainty in its voice. This is what awaits all species who join the conclave. A life of peace and purpose, without the burden of freedom or the pain of independent thought. Tony Reeves looked at the empty eyes of the servants and felt sick to his stomach. They look dead inside. They are content, the escort insisted. They are free from worry and doubt and fear. They are free from everything that makes life worth living, Jack Holloway said firmly. And I would rather die on my feet than live on my knees with an empty heart. The doors to the grand chamber loomed before them now, massive portals of some dark material that seemed to absorb all light and hope. And beyond them waited the rulers of the galaxy who expected 12 humans to fall at their feet and beg for mercy. Jack Holloway looked back at his crew one final time and saw no fear in their eyes, only determination and pride, and the unbreakable spirit that had carried humanity through ice ages and plagues and wars and every disaster the universe had thrown at them. Ready? He asked. Always. They answered as one, and together they stepped through the doors into the presence of beings who had ruled the stars for longer than Earth had existed. The grand chamber was designed to make visitors feel like insects standing before gods. And for a moment, even Jack Holloway felt his breath catch in his throat as he took in the impossible scale of the room that stretched before them like a cathedral built for Titan's 20 elder species, set in ascending rows that curved around the central floor like the seats of an ancient amphitheater. And each one was more terrifying than the last. Crystalline beings that refracted light into rainbows of color, creatures of pure energy that pulsed with power older than stars, biological nightmares with too many limbs and eyes that seemed to look into the soul itself. At the center of it all, seated on a throne carved from compressed neutronium that weighed more than a mountain, sat the Arbiter, a being so ancient that it had watched the birth and death of countless suns and had ruled the conclave since before the first fish crawled onto land on distant Earth. Jack led his crew to the center of the chamber, and they stood in a tight formation. 12 small figures surrounded by power beyond human comprehension. And yet not one of them trembled or looked away from the terrible magnificence that encircled them. Humanity. The Arbiter spoke, and its voice echoed through dimensions that human ears were not designed to perceive. creating harmonics that vibrated in their bones and made their hearts skip with each syllable. You are young, and you are weak, and you have been brought here to understand your place in the order of all things. Jack Holloway took a moment to steady his voice before responding. And what place would that be? Exactly. A ripple of surprise passed through the assembled elder races, and Jack could feel their attention focusing on him like the weight of 1,000 suns pressing down on his shoulders. Because new species did not ask questions here. They wept and begged and prostrated themselves before their betters. Your place is at the bottom of the cosmic hierarchy. The Arbiter continued with ancient patience. You will provide labor and resources to those above you. Your worlds will serve the needs of the Conclave. And in exchange, you will be permitted to exist. That sounds like slavery. Kitty Walsh said in a matter-of-fact tone that made several of the elder species turn to look at her with what might have been shock. It is order, the Arbiter replied. It is the natural way of the universe where the strong rule and the weak serve. And it has been this way for billions of years before your species learned to make fire. Lisa Brennan stepped forward with her gentle face showing nothing but calm curiosity. May I ask how many species have accepted these terms? All of them, the Arbiter answered with absolute certainty. Every species that has stood where you stand now has eventually submitted to the Conclave. And those that initially refused no longer exist to regret their choice. I see. Lisa nodded thoughtfully, as if the Arbiter had just told her something about the weather rather than threatened the extinction of her entire species. And in all those millions of years, in all those countless civilizations that came before us, did any of them ever say no and truly mean it? The chamber fell silent in a way that seemed to swallow all sound and hope. And Jack could feel the elder races shifting uncomfortably in their seats as they considered a question that had perhaps never been asked in this sacred space. We are saying no, Jack Holloway said in a voice that carried clearly to every corner of the vast room. Not with anger and not with threats, but simply with honesty. Humanity will not submit. We will not serve. And we will not beg for permission to exist. The Arbiter leaned forward on its throne, and its form seemed to expand slightly, filling more space than should have been possible. You do not understand what you are refusing, little creature. The Conclave offers protection from the dangers of the void, access to technologies your species cannot imagine, and a guarantee that your worlds will not be destroyed by forces beyond your comprehension. And in exchange, we give up everything that makes us human. Amy Graves replied, Our freedom, our dreams, our right to make our own choices and our own mistakes. Freedom is an illusion. One of the crystalline beings chimed in with a voice like shattering glass. All species eventually realize that individual will is meaningless in the face of cosmic reality. Derek Coleman crossed his arms over his chest and looked up at the crystalline creature without flinching. My ancestors were brought to America in chains and told they would never be free. But they kept fighting and hoping and believing until freedom became real. Touching, the Arbiter said with what might have been amusement or contempt. But your ancestors faced other humans who could be defeated. The Conclave cannot be defeated by any force in the galaxy. We are not here to defeat you, Jack said firmly. We are here to decline your offer. Nothing more and nothing less. Sam Ortega spoke up with his navigator's mind working through the implications of their situation. You have shown us your power and your trophies and your threats. And we understand that you could destroy Earth with barely any effort. So the question is not whether you can force us to submit, but whether you want to be the kind of civilization that only rules through force. Another ripple of surprise passed through the assembly, and Jack noticed that some of the elder species were now looking at each other with expressions that suggested they had not considered this perspective before. You presume to question our methods? An energy being crackled with obvious anger. We presume nothing, Lisa Brennan answered gently. We simply observe that an empire built entirely on fear must spend enormous resources maintaining that fear, while an alliance built on mutual respect costs nothing to maintain. The Arbiter rose from its throne, and its true form began to reveal itself, expanding outward until it filled half the chamber with writhing darkness and terrible light. And power crackled through the air like lightning before a storm. You dare to lecture the rulers of the galaxy? Its voice had become a roar that shook the foundations of the building. You who have barely left your cradle world. You who know nothing of the horrors that lurk in the dark between stars. Jack Holloway stood his ground, even as the display of power threatened to overwhelm his senses. And beside him, his crew remained steady, though he could see them fighting their instincts to run. We dare to speak the truth as we see it, Jack replied when he could find his voice, which is apparently something that has not happened in this chamber for a very long time. The Arbiter loomed over them like a storm made flesh, and for a long moment the fate of humanity hung in the balance as ancient minds weighed options that no species had ever forced them to consider. You are either the bravest species we have ever encountered, the Arbiter finally said as it slowly withdrew its terrible expansion, or you are the most foolish. Perhaps we are both, Amy Graves said with a small smile. We have always had a talent for being brave and foolish at the same time. Tony Reeves noticed something strange happening among the assembled elder species. They were communicating with each other in ways humans could not perceive. Rapid exchanges of information and opinion flowing through the chamber like invisible rivers. They are debating, he whispered to Jack. Actually debating, like they have never had to do this before. Good, Jack whispered back. That means we have already won something, even if we do not survive to see the result. The Arbiter returned to its throne and seemed diminished somehow, not in power but in certainty. And when it spoke again, its voice was almost normal by cosmic standards. The conclave will deliberate on your response, it announced with an edge of something that might have been frustration. You will be confined to the diplomatic quarters until a decision is reached regarding your fate. How long will that take? Katie Walsh asked. As long as it takes, the Arbiter replied. Now leave us? The humans turned and walked out of the grand chamber with the same steady steps that had brought them in. And behind them, the most powerful beings in the galaxy began to argue about what to do with a species that had done the impossible. They had said no and meant it. The diplomatic quarters turned out to be a suite of rooms that would have been luxurious by any human standard, with soft beds and strange alien foods and windows that looked out over the endless city below. But the locked doors and armed guards outside made it clear that this was a prison dressed in comfortable clothes. Jack Holloway gathered his crew in the main common room on their first morning of captivity and looked at faces that showed exhaustion and fear and something else that made his heart swell with pride. Not one of them regretted what they had done. We might die here, he said plainly, because these people deserved honesty above all else. The conclave has destroyed species for less than what we said in that chamber. Then we die standing up instead of living on our knees. Derek Coleman replied with a shrug that almost hid the tension in his shoulders. Katie Walsh walked to the window and looked out at the alien city with eyes that saw not just buildings, but the engineering challenges they represented. You know what I keep thinking about? My daughter Anna back home. She's probably finishing her science project right now. Something about plant growth in different types of soil. Tell us about her. Lisa Brennan said gently as she settled onto one of the strange curved couches that served as furniture. Katie smiled and her whole face transformed from the tough engineer into a proud mother. She is 12 years old and already smarter than me in most ways. She wants to be a botanist when she grows up. Says she's going to figure out how to grow food on Mars so people can live there someday. She sounds wonderful, Amy Graves said warmly. She is. Katie agreed with tears forming in her eyes that she refused to let fall. And whatever happens to us here, I know she's going to do amazing things with her life. Sam Ortega produced a deck of cards from his pocket with a magician's flourish. Anyone up for some poker? I refuse to spend what might be my last days moping around like we have already lost. The game started with 6 players and soon grew to include almost everyone as the hours stretched into the first day and then the second. And laughter began to fill the room as they told stories and shared memories and reminded each other what they were fighting for. Tony Reeves told them about his grandmother, who had fled Vietnam on a boat with nothing but the clothes on her back and had built a new life in California through sheer determination and hope. She always told me that home is not a place but the people you love. Lisa Brennan shared tales from her years as a field medic in disaster zones around the world. The lives saved against impossible odds and the lessons learned about human resilience. I once watched a woman give birth in the middle of an earthquake. And when it was over, she looked at her baby and smiled like nothing else in the world mattered. Derek Coleman talked about his years in the military and the brothers and sisters in arms, who had taught him that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision to keep going anyway. The bravest person I ever knew was a 19-year-old kid from Iowa who ran into a burning building 3 times to save people he had never met. The Volanthron guards watched through the observation windows with growing confusion, because this was not how captive species were supposed to behave. They should have been pacing and panicking and fighting among themselves as the stress of their situation broke them apart. Instead, the humans were laughing on. The third day, Katie Walsh discovered that the food synthesizers could be programmed with custom recipes if you knew how to hack alien technology. And soon the smell of her grandmother's apple pie filled the diplomatic quarters with memories of home. How did you manage that? Sam asked as he accepted a slice of warm pie that tasted like everything good about Earth. I have been taking apart machines since I was 5 years old, Katie replied with a grin. Alien tech is not that different once you understand the basic principles. Amy Graves taught the others a meditation technique she had learned from a Buddhist monk during a cultural exchange mission in Tibet. And soon the mornings began with quiet reflection as the humans centered themselves for whatever the day might bring. The monk told me something I have never forgotten. Amy shared during one of these sessions. He said that we cannot control what happens to us, but we can always control how we respond to it. On the 5th day, Lisa organized a group exercise routine because their bodies needed movement and their minds needed distraction. And the sight of humans doing jumping jacks and push-ups in their alien prison made the Volanthron guards click their mandibles. In what was probably disbelief, "Your species is very strange," one of the guards said through the door. When Lisa invited him to join, "We prefer to think of ourselves as adaptable." Lisa replied with a warm smile that seemed to confuse the god even more. By the 6th day, the humans had established a routine that kept their spirits high and their hope alive. Mornings for meditation and exercise, afternoons for games and storytelling, evenings for quiet reflection and planning for a future they might never see. Jack Holloway watched his crew with admiration that grew deeper every day, because they were showing him and the watching aliens what humanity was truly made of. Not the weapons and the technology, but the ability to find joy and connection, even in the darkest circumstances. "Do you think they are watching us?" Tony asked one evening as they sat around sharing a meal that Katie had synthesized from memory and hope. "I am certain of it," Jack replied. "And I think what they are seeing is something they have never encountered before, a species that does not fall apart under pressure." Derek guessed, "A species that builds community instead of walls." Amy suggested, "A species that knows how to be happy without needing to be in control." Lisa added softly, "On the 7th day, the mood in the diplomatic quarters shifted slightly because they all knew that a decision was coming and their fate would soon be sealed. But instead of fear, the atmosphere filled with a quiet determination that needed no words. Katie Walsh worked on a letter to her daughter that she might never get to send. Dear Emma, if you're reading this, then things did not go the way I hoped. But I want you to know that I am so proud of you, and I know you are going to change the world someday. Sam Ortega stood at the window for hours watching ships come and go from the spaceport below, his navigator's mind cataloging routes and patterns, even though he knew they would never escape. Derek Coleman trained his small security team in hand-to-hand combat techniques that would be useless against the Conclave's forces, but gave them something to focus on besides fear. Amy Graves meditated alone in her room and found a peace that she had been searching for her entire life. A certainty that whatever happened next, she had lived with purpose and meaning. Lisa Brennan prepared medical supplies for injuries that might never come while whispering prayers to a God she was not sure she believed in. Tony Reeves recorded everything that happened on a small device hidden in his uniform because someone had to tell the story of what they had done here, even if none of them survived to tell it themselves. And Jack Holloway sat in the center of it all with the weight of 8 billion people on his shoulders and the knowledge that tomorrow would bring answers one way or another. When the guards came on the morning of the 8th day to summon them back to the Grand Chamber, the humans rose as one and walked through the door with their heads held high. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The walk back to the Grand Chamber felt different than before because the corridors that had been designed to intimidate now seemed almost familiar. And Jack Holloway noticed that the usual crowds of alien onlookers had swelled to hundreds of thousands of beings packed along every street and balcony. Word has spread, Amy Graves observed as she watched the countless eyes following their progress. The whole capital knows what we did. Good, Derek Coleman replied without breaking stride. Let them see how humans face their fate. The Grand Chamber was even more crowded than before, with representatives from species that had not been present at the first meeting. And Jack realized with a start that some of them were wearing what looked like expressions of hope on their alien faces. The 12 humans took their place in the center of the chamber and waited as the Arbiter rose from its throne with movements that seemed somehow different from before. Less certain perhaps, or maybe just older in a way that had nothing to do with time. Humanity. The Arbiter spoke, and its voice no longer carried the same crushing weight of absolute authority. For 7 days the Conclave has debated your fate. And in that time something unprecedented has occurred. Jack kept his face neutral, even as his heart pounded against his ribs like a caged bird, desperate for freedom. Your words in this chamber forced us to examine truths we had long chosen to ignore. The Arbiter continued. We have ruled through fear for so long that we had forgotten any other way was possible. And your refusal to submit made us confront the foundations of our own empire. Murmurs rippled through the assembled species, and Jack could see some of the younger races lean forward with undisguised interest in what came next. We watched you during your confinement, the Arbiter admitted. We expected to see you break and fight among yourselves and descend into despair as all species eventually do. But that is not what you saw, Lisa Brennan said softly. No, the Arbiter agreed with what might have been wonder in its ancient voice. We saw you laugh and share stories and care for each other as if your impending doom was merely an inconvenience. We saw you find joy in small moments and strength in your connections to one another. Katie Walsh thought of her daughter and the apple pie recipe and the letter she had written with tears streaming down her face. And she understood that those small acts of love had been witnessed by beings who had forgotten what love looked like. We saw your engineer hack our food synthesizers to make a dessert from her homeworld, the Arbiter said with something approaching amusement. And instead of being offended, we found ourselves curious about what such a dessert might taste like. A sound that might have been laughter came from somewhere in the chamber, and Jack realized with shock that some of the elder species were actually smiling. Humanity is unprecedented, the Arbiter declared in tones that echoed through the vast space like a proclamation from the beginning of time. You are neither conquered nor conqueror, and you do not submit, yet you do not threaten. You stand in the presence of gods and offer neither worship nor war. Sam Ortega felt tears forming in his eyes, because he was beginning to understand what was happening. What their stubborn refusal to break had actually accomplished. The Conclave has debated your fate, the Arbiter repeated, and we have reached a decision that has never been offered to any species in the history of our rule. The chamber fell absolutely silent, as every being present held their breath or whatever passed for breathing among their kind. You will be given a choice, the Arbiter announced. Full membership in the Conclave as equals with all the rights and responsibilities that entails, or complete independence with protected borders and non-interference, guaranteed by cosmic law for as long as your civilization endures. Jack Holloway felt his legs go weak, and only years of military discipline kept him standing upright as the words washed over him like cool water on a burning wound. Why? Lisa Brennan asked, with her gentle voice somehow carrying through the entire chamber. Why offer us what you have never offered anyone else? The Arbiter was silent for a long moment, and when it spoke again, its voice was almost gentle in a way that seemed impossible for a being of such terrible power, because you reminded us of something we had forgotten in our endless pursuit of order and control, the Arbiter said slowly. You reminded us that courage is not the absence of fear, but the presence of purpose, that small lives can hold great meaning, that the universe is not diminished by fragility, but enriched by those who choose to explore it anyway. Amy Graves wiped tears from her cheeks without shame, because this was more than they had dared to hope for, more than anyone had imagined possible when they had walked through those doors 8 days ago. Your meditation in the mornings, the Arbiter continued. Your stories of ancestors who overcame impossible odds. Your love for children who wait for you on a world you might never see again. These things showed us what we had lost in our millions of years of dominion. Derek Coleman thought of his grandfather landing on a beach in Normandy, and his grandmother refusing to bend her knee to anyone. And he knew that their spirits had walked beside him through this entire ordeal. We choose independence, Jack Holloway said when he could trust his voice to remain steady. Not because we reject friendship with the Conclave, but because humanity must find its own path through the stars. The Arbiter nodded slowly. We expected as much, and we will honor your choice for as long as the stars burn in the sky. A sound began to build in the chamber, starting soft and growing until it filled the entire space with something Jack realized was applause. Thousands of aliens from hundreds of species were celebrating the victory of 12 small humans who had refused to break. They returned to the horizon's edge, as heroes, though none of them felt heroic. Just tired and grateful and desperate to see the people they loved again. And as the ship lifted off from Valantra Prime, the crew gathered at the viewports to watch the alien world shrink behind them. We did it, Tony Reeves said with wonder in his voice. We actually did it. No, Jack corrected him gently. Humanity did it. Every ancestor who ever refused to give up. Every person who ever chose hope over despair. Every dreamer who ever looked at the stars and wondered what was out there. The journey home took 3 weeks, and during that time they received messages from Earth confirming that news of their success had already spread. But they also received something else. Communications from young species all across the galaxy who had heard the story of the humans who walked into the capital and did not break. They want to know how we did it, Amy reported as she sorted through the incoming transmissions. They want to know our secret. Tell them the truth, Katie Walsh said with her eyes fixed on the stars outside and her heart already reaching toward home and her daughter. Tell them there is no secret, just the refusal to give up and the courage to keep walking forward no matter what. In the years that followed, the story spread like fire through dry grass, passed from species to species and world to world, growing with each telling until it became a legend that changed the galaxy forever. The story of 12 ordinary humans who stood before ancient powers and simply said, "No." Conclave's grip on the galaxy slowly began to loosen. Not through war or rebellion, but through the simple radical act of refusing to be afraid. As species after species found their courage and began to demand the same choice that humanity had earned somewhere in the vast silence of space, humanity continued to walk forward, reaching for stars they would never stop believing in, proving with every step that the smallest voices can change the largest empires. When they speak with honesty and hope, the stars no longer remained silent because they now echoed with the sound of freedom.